I am so thrilled to be able to introduce our final speaker, Davis Smith. Davis is the founder and CEO of Cotapaxi, an outdoor gear brand with a humanitarian mission. He is a member of the United Nations Foundation's Global Leadership Council and a Presidential Leadership Scholar. Davis was Silicon Valley Community Foundation's CEO of the Year and previously started Brazil's Startup of the Year. Davis holds an MBA from the Wharton School, an MA from the University of Pennsylvania, and a BA from Brigham Young University. Davis is an adventurer who has floated down the Amazon on a self-made raft, kayaked from Cuba to Florida, and explored North Korea. We are in for a treat. Please join me in welcoming Davis Smith to the stage.
All right. I hope you can all hear me and see me. So, all right. By the way, Catherine, where are you from?
Toronto.
Toronto. Okay. Actually, I guess I think a few of you are Canadian, right? Okay. So, and I don't think we talked about this, but I am Canadian. I'm half Canadian, and so it's fun. I love hearing the Canadian accent of my mom. So
let's keep saying about and about.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, pass it over to you. Looking forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here with everyone. And I know we all wish we could be doing this in person. In Las Vegas, it'd be a lot more fun than in our bedrooms or our offices or whatever. So it's just a pleasure to be with you all, though. And I'm gonna try to share my screen here. If you'll give me 1 second, I'll just bring it up. All right. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Cotapaxi, the brand that I started, and also a little bit about the backstory and actually the reason that we exist. And the story really starts from the time I was a child. When I was 4 years old, my family left the United States and we moved to the Dominican Republic. And yes, you're looking at this picture thinking, wow, Davis looks a little different. Yes, I actually had hair at one point. I miss it. I love looking at these pictures to remind me. But growing up in Latin America, where I spent all of my childhood and into my teenage years, and then I spent a lot of my adult life there as well, I had a really unique upbringing. My dad was an adventurer. So we always had some crazy adventure planned. We made our own raft and floated the Amazon River fishing for piranha when we lived in South America. I developed this deep love for the outdoors and for adventure. But I think more importantly than that, I developed a deep sense of empathy for other people. I grew up seeing poverty that I think most people don't even understand exists. I remember one of my earliest memories as a 4-year-old was seeing children that were my age, 3 or 4 years old, that were completely naked on the sides of the street. And at that age, I already recognized that something was wrong. I didn't understand why my life was so different from theirs. And my family didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have much, but it seemed like we had so much compared to those around us. And so from that young age, I knew that I wanted to use my life to find a way to help others. Recognizing that my life was so different, not because I was smarter or better or harder working or more deserving in some way. It was only because of where I'd been born. And so this was something that I'd wanted to do from the time I was a child. I wanted to find a way to help others. And so I actually, let's see if we can, I can't advance the slide very easily without being in presentation mode, but I think here we go. When I was in college, I moved to the United States. I went to college here in the United States, and I found an internship in Peru. I was really excited about it. I wanted to go experience living in Latin America again. I wanted to spend time giving and serving. And I thought this might be a career path for me, working in the nonprofit world. And so I was very excited about this internship. And I ended up, going to Lima, Peru, and then to Cusco. And I don't know how many of you have been to Cusco before, but it's this amazing city up in the heart of the Andes Mountains. And I know some of you might be thinking, oh yeah, I know Cusco. That's the llama in Emperor's New Groove. And yes, it is. And so just an amazing city. I fell in love with it. The moment I stepped in the city, I was just overcome. It was just magical. And instead of my first meal, instead of eating in a restaurant, I decided I wanted to eat in the heart of the city on a bench in the main plaza, in the Plaza de Armas in the center of Cusco. So I bought some food and I went and sat down on this park bench and was just kind of soaking in the magic of the city. When all these little kids ran up to me and they tried to sell me things. They were selling finger puppets and postcards and candy and other things. And having grown up in Latin America, I immediately connected with these little kids. And I started joking around with them a little while. And after a while, they all ran off. But there was one little boy who sat next to me on his shoe shining kit. And he kept insisting that he wanted to shine my shoes. And it took me a few minutes to convince him it's not actually possible to shine tennis shoes. And so, I wasn't going to be hiring him for his shoe shining service, but he kept sitting there and he kept watching me as I was eating. And I then recognized maybe he's sitting here watching me eat because he's hungry. So I offered him the rest of my lunch, and I never remember seeing somebody eat like this before. I was in complete shock. He just devoured this food. And that night when I got dinner, I decided I was going to go look for this little boy again. His name was Edgar. And Edgar was 9 years old, but very small for a 9-year-old. And he was always easy to spot because he had, every single day, he had the same clothes on with a hole in the butt of his pants with no underwear on. So you could always spot him from a distance. And I found him straight away and I gave him this food, and he was totally shocked that I'd come back to look for him. And he took the food and he ran over and he started sharing it with all of his friends, and they were eating this food with their hands. And so this became a daily ritual for me. It was the highlight of my day, every single day, finding Edgar and looking for him and bringing him food. My last night in Cusco, the night before I left, I was walking down the street. It was close to midnight. It was cold. You could see your breath in the air. And as I was walking down the street, I saw two little boys laying on the street, cuddled together, trying to stay warm on the little sidewalk. And as I got closer, I recognized that one of the boys was my little friend, Edgar. And as I approached him, I noticed I could tell he'd been crying. You could see these tear-stained cheeks. And I woke him up and I asked him why he was sleeping on the street. And he told me that somebody had stolen his shoe shining kit. And he was too afraid to go home because he was afraid because his father was an alcoholic and his mom depended on him to help him feed his family. This is a 9-year-old boy. And I gave him the little bit of cash that I had. I didn't have much. And that night I went back to my place and I couldn't even sleep. I was just so worried about this little boy and just thinking about this life that he had to live. The next day, I got on a bus and I was leaving Cusco. We went around the main plaza to let some people on and off the bus. And I looked out the window as we went in front of the main cathedral right there in the center of the city. There were some steps that went up to the cathedral. I looked out the window and I saw Edgar. And he saw me. And I had just enough time where I slid open the window of this bus and waved goodbye to him. And he ran next to the bus, waving goodbye to me. And he had this big bag of candy in one arm, and he'd bought with the money I gave him, and he was selling the candy in the streets. So he was a true entrepreneur, which I just love now. It was on that bus that I made a commitment to myself that this is how I wanted to use my life. I wanted to find a way to help kids like Edgar and give them a little more opportunity in some way. And I didn't even know exactly what that meant, but I went back to college and I'd read an article about a man named Steve Gibson, who he and his wife, Betty, they had retired. They were about 60 years old. He had sold a business. He was a successful entrepreneur. And he and his wife had moved to the Philippines and bought a large home and started housing 25 people at a time in this home. And they went and lived in a nearby apartment. And in this home, they would hold people in residence for 2 months where they would teach them how to become entrepreneurs. And it was such an inspiring article, this newspaper article I read. I actually cut out the article and I put it in the front cover of my binder at school. And I walked around with it every day. And I would be so inspired by it. I'd see it, 10 or 20 times a day. And it was just there to remind me what really mattered. And fast forward a little bit, as I'm finishing college, my very last few weeks of school, I'm on campus on a Saturday for a social impact conference. And I didn't even know anything about social impact, really. I was just kind of learning and trying to understand it. And as I was walking down the hallway in between some different sessions, I saw the man from this article, Steve Gibson, getting into an elevator. And I recognized him. So I ran down the hallway. I stuck my arm in the door as it was closing. I jumped inside and he was trapped. He had to talk to me. And so I introduced myself and I told him I knew who he was. And, keep in mind, this guy, he's a multimillionaire. He's changed thousands of people's lives. I'm a nobody. And he was acting so flattered that I recognized him. And he invited me to go meet with him in a couple of weeks in his office. And so I spent the next 2 weeks preparing a pitch where I was going to convince him to let me go work for him. And I wanted to expand his program from the Philippines to Latin America, where I'd grown up. And I'm giving him this pitch. And I've practiced it like, I don't know how many times at home, like in the mirror. But I'm giving him this pitch. And the whole time he's smiling and nodding. And in my head, I'm thinking, nailing it. Like, I am going to get to work for my idol. And at the end, he goes, Davis, I love your passion. I love how passionate you are about finding a way to help people. But what I see in you is that you would be a great entrepreneur. You shouldn't go work for me or for another nonprofit. You should go start a business. And then sometime down the line, 10 or 20 years from now, you'll go find your own way of making an impact. And I left that meeting. I'd never really considered being an entrepreneur seriously. And I left that meeting thinking, wow, like this guy, my idol, saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. And I decided I'm going to become an entrepreneur. Now, I know Steve Gibson well. He's around 80 now. We still get together once or twice a year and have a meal together. And what I've learned is that Steve Gibson tells everybody he meets they would be a great entrepreneur. So it turns out I wasn't special. But honestly, it gave me a lot of confidence and it put me on a new path. And so I ended up starting a business out of school. And my cousin and I built it together. It did $1 million our first year in business. And then the business continued to grow. We built it for about 6.5 years, and then we sold it. And my cousin went to Harvard Business School. I went to the Wharton School. And when we graduated, we moved down to Brazil and built a business there. It was a really fun experience being back in Latin America where I grew up. And my daughters were speaking Portuguese. And in some ways, it was a dream come true. We built a business that went from 4 employees to 300 employees in 18 months. At the same time, I knew I wanted to leave. And I think most people didn't understand it. But for me, every single day, I would see little Edgars. I'd see children in the streets, in shanty towns that had no chance. No matter what they did, they would be trapped in poverty their entire lives. And I felt I had to do something about it. And I didn't even know exactly what to do. But then I had this idea that I should build a brand, a business, where we use our profits to go sustainably and scalably fight poverty. And I believed if I could go build a $1 billion business, a massive business that could go do this, that I could help change the world. And not only that, but I believed that if I could go build a business that could do good authentically, that we could go inspire other business leaders and other businesses. And I remember writing in my journal as I was having this idea, I wrote in my journal that if I could inspire 1,000 other business leaders to go out and do good, that would have a much bigger impact than anything I could do individually, especially if all of them are out influencing other businesses to go do good as well. And so I wanted to change capitalism. I wanted to make capitalism focus on something other than just maximizing profits and enriching a few people. I wanted to build something that could truly make an impact in the world and become a movement brand. And so I moved back to the United States and I started building this brand called Cotapaxi. Cotapaxi is the name of a volcano in Ecuador where I grew up as a kid. This volcano overlooks the capital city of Quito. And I used to look at the mountain all the time. And my dad and my brother and I, we'd go camping there. And I spent a lot of time backpacking and camping around that mountain, Cotapaxi. The name of my school when I lived in Ecuador was called Academia Cotopaxi, so named after this volcano. And so the name had special meaning to me, and it linked back to my childhood and the experiences that I'd had, seeing poverty and how it shaped me and the lens in which I saw the world. And so, of course, this is a very, very saturated space. And all of you know this as well as anyone. There are a lot of brands out there that make outdoor gear and jackets and bags. And how are we going to go compete? Well, that's a good question. And a lot of investors, because I knew I needed to raise capital to go do this. I left my business in Brazil and everything I'd invested in that business behind. And so I needed investors to believe in me. And I got a lot of no's. But I ended up having some investors that believed, Kirsten Green and Ellie Wheeler and Lauren Iveson, these amazing investors that believed in what we were trying to build and then invested in our brand. And so we built this outdoor brand that was built around this idea of giving back and doing good. But I wanted to build the product totally differently than had ever really been done before. I wanted, the outdoor industry is just full of blacks and grays. And I felt we needed to make it more colorful. And I wanted to make it more inclusive. Growing up in Latin America, I didn't grow up skiing or rock climbing. And oftentimes in the outdoor industry, I felt like an outsider. I remember one of my first outdoor events I went to as the founder of Cotapaxi. I met some guy who shook my hand and he said, "Your hands are way too soft to be in the outdoor industry." And that was kind of the outdoor industry. It was like, if you're not hardcore, if you're not climbing mountains on the weekends and like rock climbing in the evenings and jumping out of a helicopter with like an avalanche chasing behind you, then you're not like hardcore enough for our industry. And I just didn't like that. I just felt we needed to build an industry that was a lot more inclusive of people that maybe not be doing those things, but could enjoy the outdoors more. And so we built this brand that was full of color and life. More importantly, we thought differently about how we made the product. And so you'll see a lot of these products, a lot of our bags, and even those like the Teva sandals there. We made all of that out of remnant material. We use the same factories as Patagonia and Arc'teryx, these other amazing brands. But there was so much waste in the cutting and sewing process that we wanted to find a way to use those materials. We also saw that the sewers at this factory, they were amazing. And this factory is an amazing partner. They treat people well. They pay people fairly. They have basketball and volleyball clubs for their team. And they rock the 80s music all day long, which is my favorite. It's a great place. At the same time, I looked at the work they did and I thought, I wonder how fulfilling this is. The average sewer has been there 11 and a half years. So they stick around. But we thought, what if we allowed them to be creative? These are artisans, these are craftsmen, but they don't get to choose anything about the work they do. And so we empowered them to go sew the bags. And we gave them one rule, make no bag alike. Every bag needs to be one of a kind. And so we're using these remnant materials and they're choosing the colors and the material. And sometimes the buckles when they go together are different colors and the stitches are different colors, but they put all their creative power into making these unique products. So we thought completely differently about how to make the product. But we also wanted to tie doing good into every aspect of the business. And our slogan is Gear for Good. A lot of times you'll see our tagline, Do Good. We have Do Good shirts and hats and all sorts of other gear. But we tried to weave this impact strategy into everything that we do. We focus on fighting extreme poverty around the world. That is our focus. And while that's our focus, we understand that we have to protect the environment at the same time. But for me, that wasn't a differentiator. That wasn't something that would set us apart from anyone else. That was table stakes. We all have to do that. So 94% of all of our product last year was made of remnant and recycled material. We have a carbon footprint that's fractions of the size of any businesses in our industry because we're using so much of this remnant material. But our key focus, our dollars that we made as a business, we wanted to dedicate towards fighting poverty. And we focus on education, healthcare, and livelihood training. And these are the areas that we have a lot of passion around. And so we use the profits to support amazing nonprofits around the world, mostly in the Americas, that focus on these core issues. This nonprofit here is called Educate Girls. This one's actually in India, and it focuses on getting girls back into classrooms. Unfortunately, in some parts of the world, the education of girls is not valued the same as it is for boys. And what we know is that when you educate a girl, you educate a mother, and you educate entire communities. And so this is critically important to lift people out of poverty. We also, aside from doing grants and giving money to nonprofits and using our supply chain to go impact lives throughout the world, wherever we manufacture, we also work in our local community. This is one of my favorite stories of Cotapaxi. When you order a backpack or a jacket from Cotapaxi, you actually get a handwritten thank you card. These are two images I just found on Google. I did a search and people had posted these pictures. And everyone that gets one of these orders, they get a thank you card. These refugees are part of the International Rescue Committee, which is a big resettlement agency, and Cotapaxi's Job Club. We created this job club with them. And refugees, when they get resettled in the United States, specifically in Salt Lake City, Utah, where we're based, these refugees can get their first job with us. And our team volunteers and teaches them how to create a resume, how to do a job interview. And they are trying to help them get started. And they can get this first job where they can actually be card writers, and they can write thank you cards. They write it in their native language since they're still learning English. They write their name, they write where they're from and the language that they wrote the thank you card in. And so we've had several hundred refugees that have worked in this program over the years. And it's amazing to see the impact that it's been able to have. This is one of the applications from one of the refugees. She says, when we asked the question, tell us what makes you unique, she said, my name is Muke Bao. She says, I'm from Thailand. I speak 4 different languages. I was born in Thailand. I like to play soccer. I am a strong woman. And anyone that knows a refugee knows that this is true. They have gone through some of the most difficult and heartbreaking things you can imagine. This picture was a few years ago in Syria. Many of our card writers have come from Syria. A lot of the work we do with the IRC, they're one of our grantees, is helping refugees like in Syria and in Venezuela and other places. Many of these refugees will sacrifice everything they own to pay smugglers to get them out, to try to flee. They'll put their lives at risk to go do that. And they do that so they can arrive in a place like this. This is the Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan. This is on the Syrian border. It was once, just a few years ago, just desert. And now they have 100,000 people living in the city. These are amazing, amazing people. People that once had successful careers were teachers and doctors and lawyers and business people. And they're having to start all over again. This main street that you see in the city is, they call it the Champs-Élysées, named after the famous shopping street in Paris. And on the street, there are 1,400 small businesses, little shops, women that are baking cakes and opening restaurants, women sewing wedding dresses, men making furniture out of scrap pieces of wood. It is really inspiring to see these people that are using their creativity and the skills that they have to try to go start this new life. One of my favorite moments at the Zaatari camp was actually at the end of the day. I was on this little hill that kind of overlooked the city. And as I was there, all these little kids started following me around, and they were very curious as to why the very tall, bald white guy was walking around. And, I don't speak Arabic and they don't speak English. But we could communicate to each other with our eyes and with our smiles. And instinctively, one of these little boys grabbed my hands and flipped off his sandals and walked up my legs and then did a little backflip. And pretty soon, all the little kids lined up and they wanted to do the same thing. And every one of them took off their shoes before walking up my body. And I'm sure some of you have done this with your own kids, or maybe you did it when you were a kid with your parents. But it was amazing. And pretty soon I had these dusty little footprints all the way up and down my body. And I loved how they took off their shoes, because my kids don't do that. They're not that respectful. So I just thought it was so kind of them. And this was a highlight for me. For a few minutes, these children were able to forget that they were in a refugee camp. The average refugee lives in a camp for 18 years. Only 1% of refugees are ever resettled. So they have been sentenced basically their entire childhoods to live in this refugee camp. And so for me, this really hit home the urgency of the work that each of us has to do. We've been given so much. One of my favorite quotes is by a man named O.C. Tanner. And he said, one way to describe a life of service would be to understand that for every right we claim, there is a corresponding duty. And for every privilege, a responsibility. He says, yet it is more. It is a heart filled with love and gratitude, such that one feels he could never repay the debt he owes. The only way to free ourselves from the prison of selfishness is to pour out our lives in love and service to great causes and noble ideas. This is how I aspire to live. I understand I've been given so much, and I feel a responsibility to give back, but I want to believe that it is more than that. I want to feel that no matter how much I give, I could never repay the debt that I owe. And I am committed to living my life, really committed to great causes and noble ideas. Some of you may be wondering whatever happened to that little boy in Peru, Edgar. And I've wondered the same thing. Whatever happened with this little boy? Did he have the chance to go to school? Did he ever have a chance as he grew up to be able to get a career that he was proud of and that he was able to grow from? Was able to start his own family? And these are the kind of questions I asked myself for years. I've thought of Edgar every single day for 20 years since I met him. Well, a few years ago, after starting Cotapaxi, I decided I wanted to go back to Peru for the first time since I lived there. And I wanted to see if I could find Edgar, who would now be a man. And I went into the main center of the city, the Plaza de Armas, and I had a picture of him sitting on his shoe shining kit. And I had a little 13-second video clip of him running next to this bus, waving goodbye to me. And armed with that, I started asking people in the streets if they knew of anyone named Edgar and if they recognized this picture. And pretty soon there was a group of like 60 people that gathered around me and wondering why the tall, bald gringo was speaking Spanish and showing this picture. And someone in the back called out and said, I know who that is. That's my best friend. And we have grown up on the streets together. This young man that came up, he was carrying a big binder full of art. He was selling artwork in the streets. And we walked over to a payphone, and I put some change in the phone, and he dialed a number. And someone answered the phone, and I said, I'm looking for Edgar. And he said, this is Edgar. And I was just overcome with emotion. I could not believe it. And we ended up connecting, and we spent the entire next day together, just embracing and sharing. He took me up. He wanted to show me his home. And so he was so excited to show it to me. So we got on this little mini bus, and we took it up into the hills of Cusco, and then kind of walked up the side of this mountain to get to a little home where he lived. And as we did this little journey, he told me his life story, that when he was 13 years old, when he was 11 years old, his mom had died giving birth to his younger brother. And that when he was 13 or 14, his dad died of alcohol abuse. And so he was left an orphan, raising his younger siblings. They slept on and lived on the streets for a number of months or years. And eventually they got into a shelter, and then he was able to save enough money where he was able to get this little home that he had. And when I got to the home, it was a home made of mud, and it had a hole in the ground for their toilet. And there was a part of me that was so discouraged to see how he was living. But there was another part of me that was just so proud of him, because I could tell how proud he was of what he'd done. And so we spent the rest of the afternoon talking about what his dreams were. And he told me that if he could do anything, he'd want to be a tour guide, that he knew the streets of Cusco better than anyone because he'd grown up on the streets, that he'd learned English pretty well, from speaking to so many tourists every single day from the time he can even remember, selling them things. And so we put together a plan. And he couldn't afford to go back to school and hadn't even done proper schooling as a young person. But we got him into a 3-year program where he was able to learn to be a tour guide. And I agreed to help him with the tuition as long as he did well in school. So he started sending me pictures of his report card. And he did pretty well most of the time. So just really proud of him. And he graduated in 2020. And you can imagine how challenging that was. I had planned to go down for his graduation, but that obviously those plans were changed. And in May, the first week of May, just a month or two into the pandemic, he sent me a desperate note on Facebook, and we're in touch multiple times a week. He's one of the most active Facebook users on the planet, I think. So he sent me a note on Facebook and said, "Davis, I am embarrassed to even ask you about this, but I don't know what else to do. I am desperate. We have nothing. We have no food. We have nothing. There's no safety net. There's no tourists here. They're not even allowed to come in the country. So I can't sell them anything. I can't give people tours. And I don't know what else to do." And that night I went to bed uncertain of what to do myself. Do I send him money and be the person that just he comes to anytime there's a problem? Or do I help him find some other solution? And I didn't even know what that even looked like. But I went to bed that night sleepless and just tossing and turning, thinking about it all night. And at 5 a.m, I had an idea that woke me up. And it was this idea of that I thought would work. And so I contacted Edgar first thing in the morning, and I shared the idea and asked him if he'd be interested in doing it. And he said yes. And that was that he could give a virtual tour, a walking tour of Cusco, give a 30-minute walking tour. And Americans in the world, we were desperate to go get outside of our homes and experience the world, but we couldn't. And so I had said, I'll go promote it to in my social networks, and I'll get my friends and family to support. But for a $10 ticket, you can get a virtual walking tour of Cusco with Edgar. And so he ended up recording a video. He did it all on his own. I resisted the temptation to go help him solve the problems. I wanted him to learn to do it himself. He found a videographer. He recorded it once without a microphone, and it just didn't really work. So he had to redo it, and he did much better. The whole thing was better the second time. He did subtitles that he did with a friend, and they didn't quite get it perfect, but he did it on his own. And we ended up selling 2,000 tickets to people that at first it was people I knew, and pretty soon it just started spreading, and people that had no idea who we were buying these tickets to support Edgar. And so he now has his own little business, his own little storefront where he sells artwork like he was used to selling the street, and where he does tours. And I'm just so proud of him and the life that he's living. He's just such an inspiration to me, and he's changed my life. It changed meeting him and being so inspired by him, really changed the direction of my entire life. And so, and actually I'll show you a picture here. This is his tour, one of his walking tour. I'm happy, maybe I'll share it with Bobby, but I'm happy to share a link where you can go watch his tour. And if you want to send him a tip, you can. He's an amazing person. And my question to each of you is, who is your Edgar? Who is the person or the thing that can inspire you every day to look beyond yourself and to look for a way that you can touch the lives of somebody else? And I promise that as you do that, and as you find that, you'll just find so much fulfillment in life. And so that's it from me. Bobby, I'm happy to answer any questions
Hey, Davis.
Yeah.
What a beautiful story. This is my third time to hear this story, and I never get tired of hearing this story. Thank you so much for sharing this. One of the most important parts of Cotapaxi's mission, and it's a phrase you actually introduced me to, and that is supply chain philanthropy. I love the phrase because you're talking to an audience full of entrepreneurs who have this massive supply chain, manufacturers all over the world. A lot of us are agencies and distributors, but we can make a difference with our spend on one side and then our give on the other. But tell us a little bit about supply chain philanthropy and what that means to you and how that works in Cotapaxi's system.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a new thing for me too. It wasn't until I started Cotapaxi that I really started immersing myself in how to have impact in the right way. And there are good ways to have impact, and then there are great ways to have impact, and then there are actually some ways that actually create negative consequences that we just don't intend, right? But the supply chain is a really important thing, because these are people that are already working, and we can make their lives better by creating better work environments, by paying better wages. And so when we work with factories, we don't come in with like a single solution where we say, okay, any factory that works with Cotapaxi, this is what we do. We actually just go in and we ask and we listen and we say, we ask, what are the things that we can do to support you? And in some factories, we've helped finance computers, and we've helped finance computer classes where their children of the sewers are able to go in after school and go learn computer courses. Or we have English teachers. Or there's another factory where we planted a community garden on one part of the site where the factory is, where the factory workers can go take those fruits and vegetables and go home. So it's different in every place we go. But of course, there's certain standards that we have to meet in terms of like wages and other standards that we expect at a minimum. But beyond that, we try to have impact in the way that makes the most sense for that community.
Right. That's right. Davis, take care. Godspeed, my friend.